when we think about who we are, who we think we are, who we think people think we are, and how we've accomplished all the things we've accomplished, it's really because we've mastered people. We've mastered social chess. We've mastered the ability to understand the social world. And we think it's because we're intelligent. And that's it. We think we're smart, then we learn that stuff. But in fact, it's not just because we're smart. It's because over millions of years, our frontal lobes of our brains have evolved to become social brains, to allow us to survive in social groups, learn how to get along with people in our group, how to, not to offend somebody by stealing their mate or land or looking at them the wrong way, and groups organizing with each other to compete against other groups. So these are social survival skills.
Yeah.
But that's what's disrupted in autism.
Over 1 million Americans face sentencing every year, and it will be the most important day of their lives. But we don't fully understand the system, how broken it is, and what we can do to make it better. I'm Doug Passon. I'm a 25-year criminal defense lawyer and a sentencing expert. My goal is to bring more awareness, more fairness, and more humanity to the sentencing process. So, are you ready? Then let's get set for sentencing. Hey everybody, it's Doug Passon coming to you from Studio 3553 in Scottsdale, Arizona. You know the rate of autism is about 1 in 44. That means every lawyer everywhere has had clients on the autism spectrum, but we don't know what to look for. We don't know why it matters in our case. And most importantly, we do not know how to convince the decision makers to do the right thing when it comes to autism. So it does matter. And if it's dealt with appropriately, early, thoroughly, then it can make all the difference in the world to the outcome of your case. That is why I am so grateful today on this Friday afternoon to have an extraordinary attorney by the name of Mark Mahoney here today to help us get set for sentencing. Welcome, Mark Mahoney. How are you?
I'm just doing great.
For a Friday to be sitting here with me. I don't know when this show is going to air, but I just know it's Friday, and this is a great time to have a talk about autism. Now, I do want to tell my listeners more about you, and I'm not going to do a whole lengthy bio, but I'll put all that in the show notes for anybody that's wants more information about Mark Mahoney, his firm, what he does, how to reach out to him. I was Googling you just for the fun of it. And did you know the first thing that came up was a gentleman by the name of Mark Mahoney. They call him the high priest of Hollywood tattoo artists.
Yeah.
And
very
that's
amazing.
not you, though.
It is not me. It is not me. But my daughter, Maggie, who has a number of tattoos, was interested in this. And it turns out his daughter is a dead ringer for my daughter. So I don't know. It was crazy. Yeah,
interesting.
But he's never reached out to me. I don't know why. So I do have one tattoo that my daughter put on me as a Christmas present, though. So
interesting. I just learned something new about you. Well, so here's the deal. This Mark Mahoney is not the high priest of Hollywood tattoos, but what he is the premier autism defense attorney in the country. And it's not hyperbole. He's the guy. If you have an autism issue in your case, hands down, the most prominent, the most experienced attorney involved with defending people who have autism spectrum disorder. He's written extensively on the issue, and he handles these cases all over the country in every nook and cranny. And, I've done one episode so far on this early on with my good friends Jamie and Tony Sparks, where we just sort of scratch the surface. And today we're just going to go deep. So I want to dig right in. I just want to get your general take. If I didn't know anything about autism, what would you tell me it is and why it would ever be relevant in a criminal prosecution?
autism is the sum of lifetime experience that is completely different than your and my lifetime experience.
Interesting. Tell me more.
It's somebody who autism involves a cohort of people who to different degrees grow up seeing and experiencing a completely different world than you and I. Basically, it's a world stripped of the kinds of aspect of social interaction where we understand other people, how they feel, how they think, what they're likely to do in response to things that we do. It's stripped of our appreciation of the mental states of other people. And there's still a lot to the world when you don't read the minds of other people, but it's a completely different world. And part of the consequence of that is when you don't experience reciprocal emotional experience with other people in your interactions from infancy on, is you don't learn social intuition. You don't have an intuitive sense of how the world works. You don't have an intuitive sense of how people see you, about how people react to you, or how people will think about what you do. And with that comes a lack of intuitive understanding of the unwritten rules of social behavior that everybody knows except people with autism. And the reason I encounter these individuals is that some of the rules they don't know then are these unwritten, very complicated sociosexual rules about sexual relationships, things like age difference, age of consent, sexualization of children, taboos we have for these things. And they don't innately get that to differing degrees. And it depends on how severe their disruption is in their social perception. So that's my big thing is talking about autism. You got to start with the idea, because you can't experience it, the idea that these are individuals who have grown up seeing a completely different world than you.
So give me some ideas of the kinds of cases you would see somebody running afoul of these. Well, like there are written rules, there are laws, there's codes, federal and state, and a lot of times your clients are running afoul of written rules that they don't know or understand. But just help me understand, give me some examples of cases where somebody on the spectrum would be vulnerable to actually finding themselves in criminal trouble.
Well, a very common, before the internet, which changed everything, it would be very common to have somebody who with autism stalk somebody, or seem to stalk somebody they liked, a girlfriend, or not a girl that they liked. And they might do it because they thought, well, I like her, so I'll just watch her. Or maybe I'm worried that somebody might hurt her, so I'll follow her, without really understanding how that might make the other person feel. So stalking offenses were a very sort of a common thing. Making, there are things that aren't criminal, making statements like, oh, your arms are really fat, or, boy, you've got a lot of wrinkles, or you've got really large breasts. Somebody with autism might say these things out of just complete candor and not filter their speech because they don't understand how that makes other people feel. They haven't really learned that. So, but then we get into areas where you do have the internet, and virtually almost every offense. There are times when maybe in a dating kind of relationship, although dating is, as we think of it, is often pretty rare, but there are times when young men with autism they're pursued by a girl who's they don't tend to reach out, don't have the skills often to reach out to meet girls, but a girl might pursue them and enlist them into a sexual encounter, and then decide she wants to stop it, but he doesn't understand these signals that she's giving that a typically developed individual would understand. And so there might be problems of understanding consent and interpreting behavior to tell consent. Those are pretty common. There's others. We see problems with autistic individuals getting involved in sort of hyperbolic right-wing extremist online groups. If you don't grow up understanding the world and you have some people telling you they have the secrets that the government doesn't want you to know, the media doesn't want you to know about who's running the world and what the real problems are in the world, and who welcome you into their group when you're rejected by social groups yourself, it can be an extremely attractive thing. And so we've had individuals who've glommed onto these operations, either trolling people or making statements that are threatening to make themselves appear credible to the groups they want to be friends with, or saying they're going to join some extreme organization, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember a case that we had with just internet threats where there were this kid was trolling these individuals, and he was saying some things that would be interpreted as being very violent and threatening, but in his mind, he didn't think what he was saying was going to be taken seriously as any kind of a threat. And his goal was he was kind of annoyed with them and he wanted to annoy them. He thought his comments would be annoying, but he didn't understand how they would be taken by the other party. But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that is really a major component to our autism cases, is this what we call mind blindness, right? This inability to be able to see things from the perspective of the other who you're interacting with.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's in fact, what I said before, imagining a world that you grew up in where you were blind to the feelings and thoughts of others, even of your parents or relatives. And in the introduction to the famous book by Simon Baron-Cohen called Mind Blindness, two brilliant neuroscientists, Cosmides and Tooby, they talk about this as a catastrophic loss. Now, I'd have to say, for people that in your audience or people listening who may be autistic or have somebody who is autistic, and I could say a person with autism or an autistic individual, there's this correctness that we try, or sensitivity we try to have to how people want to be described.
Yeah.
But it might sound harsh to say it's a catastrophic loss. And I agree, because we don't want to make it like autism is a sickness or a disease. However, if the limitations or differences in the way your brain works keep you from understanding a very important boundary that society has set out for behavior and put in a law where people that violate it are ostracized from the community, like a sex offense, then that's catastrophic. So it's catastrophic for us, because when we don't have mind blindness, when we have this ability, this mind reading ability, we call it theory of mind, is the phrase that is often used. Well, that's when we think about who we are, who we think we are, who we think people think we are, and how we've accomplished all the things we've accomplished. It's really because we've mastered people, we've mastered social chess, we've mastered the ability to understand the social world. And we think it's because we're intelligent. And that's it. We think we're smart, then we learn that stuff. But in fact, it's not just because we're smart. It's because over millions of years, our frontal lobes of our brains have evolved to become social brains, to allow us to survive in social groups, learn how to get along with people in our group, how to, not to offend somebody by stealing their mate or land or looking at them the wrong way, and groups organizing with each other to compete against other groups. So these are social survival skills.
Yeah.
But that's what's disrupted in autism.
Yeah. So it's very simply the word Latin. It comes from auto, which means self. So it's the idea of being kind of in your own head, locked within your own self, versus that outwardly social dynamic that most of us are used to navigating every day. Your comment about the extremist groups was interesting to me because I had those cases too, but the idea that those are places where, they can find some way to understand the way the world works or make sense of the world. And I think it's an important point to stress that, I mean, we can't generalize. There's a saying, you've met one person on the spectrum, you've met one person on everybody's different. That's why they call it a spectrum. But I think generally, and I would hope you'd agree, these folks want to connect with other human beings. They want to form bonds and beautiful relationships and romantic relationships. They want to understand the world and to be able to navigate it with so much less stress and anxiety that happens to them all day, every day. And so that's why they're reaching out to these sources to look for these things. That's why they're connecting with other people online, even if maybe they're underage, but these folks are talking to them. So I guess that's a big part, because I think there's a danger that when you talk about not being able to read other people's emotions, you're talking about lack of empathy, then you start veering into this misperception that these folks are sociopathic, or that they're incapable of empathy. And that's not true, is it?
No, no, no. And it's very, to put it very simply, and some people, use these terms too casually. There are two kinds of empathy, and one is about caring and one is not. The one that's not about caring is called cognitive empathy. And on one level, the highest level, it's, I can look at another person and see that they're sad or happy, or I can walk into a room and immediately tell the difference between a funeral and a party. So I can perceive the mental states of other people in certain ways. It also goes at a very visceral level or lower level of our physical reactions to understanding the mental state of other people. You laugh, I laugh. You react startled, and I automatically look around startled because I'm perceiving that. So the other kind of empathy is caring. Assuming you do know how somebody else is feeling, you care about that, and you want to act appropriately in response to that. People with autism sometimes are too caring and too empathic with other people, and they go overboard at times. That sometimes people get into these trolling or joining radical groups because they care too much about people that have huge complaints about how their culture or people are being treated. But the problem in autism is that they don't immediately perceive the problems of other people or their feelings. So while they have difficulty perceiving somebody else's feelings, when they do learn about them, they try to typically respond as appropriately as they can. Whereas the antisocial person knows very well how other people feel and uses that to manipulate them and take advantage of them, and they don't care how it affects them. So the complete opposite. So we have to be very careful about the idea of empathy. And the other thing, going back to, which is another backdrop to all of this, is yes, they want people with autism who are, not the most profoundly affected by autism. They do want to be part of the world, but the best diagnosticians of autism are children. They know the ones who are odd. They know the ones who don't fit in and don't know how to behave, and they reject them. And and there are different ways to do that. They reject them, or often they will take advantage of them. They perceive their desperation for friendship, and they take advantage of it. And so this is something which that rejection and bullying and taking advantage of is what drives young people with autism further into isolation, where they really are dependent on the internet to make some kind of connection. So you have not only their difficulty making those connections, but the effect of their peers rejecting them to the point where it's very clear that for individuals with autism, it's very difficult to have the same kind of sense of what friendship is. and who is a friend. But they're desperate for that. So it's a very challenging situation. The fact is that sometimes they do find friendship on a level that somebody who has equal desires, equal expectations about those relationships. But the ones we see in the criminal justice system are so typically there just because they don't understand some of these really important rules, which means they are the ones who are the most affected by the disruption of those social learning skills in the brain. And so we can speak generally about these individuals. Yes, there's heterogeneity, but I see over and over again exactly the same problems where somebody says to me, I didn't know that was wrong. And something that everybody else knows is wrong. And my job is to help prosecutors and judges understand that when you strip away some of these social learning skills that we're granted in our brain, it's very difficult to innately, intuitively pick up on these things that everybody else thinks is very obvious. It really comes down to this whole issue of how do we learn moral reasoning? Where does moral reasoning come from? And we could talk about Jonathan Haidt in his writings. He's got this, and he's just one of many moral philosophers who talk about where do we get this feelings of disgust and rightness and wrongness of things. And time again, we try to say, oh, this is because it's very reasonable. We can just, we look at harm, we can give up these reasons why things are wrong. It turns out that we really learn these things from our culture. And in different cultures, we have different senses of what's morally right and wrong. And so if you don't know the culture, that's the problem. Yeah.
Let's put a concrete example, and we'll use the most extreme one because we see these cases perhaps the most, and it involves child pornography. Somebody's downloading or looking at images online of children, sometimes very young, sometimes infant children, engaged in some kind of sexual activity. So how do you explain? I mean, the hurdle that we're going to run up against is there's not a person in the world that wouldn't be able to look at that image and be disgusted and understand the levels of abuse and the moral implications that went into the production of that photo. It's right there in front of your face in living color. Don't tell me that you don't understand that that's wrong.
Yeah, so I think that this is really what I'm constantly explaining, and frankly, many prosecutors end up understanding and agreeing that this is so. That because of autism, we don't learn these, like I said, these implicit social rules and these feelings of disgust. And as Jonathan Haidt has many different ways to demonstrate that our judgment of right and wrong is affected by a sense of disgust. When we do cross-cultural studies of things like, your family dog has gotten hit by a car, is dead in the street, is it okay to eat that dog? All right, so in some cultures, say, of course you eat the dog. And here, somebody would be reviled over the fact that somebody would eat the family pet that got hit by a car. And yet people would feel it's morally, absolutely morally right and wrong one way or the other about that. The point is that this sense of disgust, in whether it's to different kinds of foods, and whether it's to different kinds of cleanliness or hygiene, or living conditions, or ways of sexuality, is a culturally determined thing. We get it not because anybody taught it to us, but because we grew up in a culture where we're surrounded by these, day in and day out from infancy, all these different influences that confirm or support this communal sense of this kind of like disgust. So if you don't grow up with that, if you are, say, a Martian coming down into the planet, and you don't really understand sexuality, you don't understand what's normal. You don't know what people really do because you've never had a chance to do it. And you haven't been in the locker room with other people who roll their eyes or make jokes about somebody being interested in somebody's younger sister or something like that. You don't really know what to make of it when you see it. There's no automatic reaction. With taboos work. Taboos, every society has had taboos, which aren't actually explicitly taught, but everybody knows. And they're very effective for keeping people in line. And the power of taboo, I think, one example I like to give is that in different kinds of research in things like child sex offenders and their interest in child pornography, they have shown images of prepubescent children to different kinds of offenders, but also to control groups. People work in the hospital or in the institution or whatever. And between 19 in 3 different studies, one in Canada, 2 in Germany, between 19 and 25% of the males who were in the control group were showing signs of attraction to the prepubescent material. So why aren't 20% of the male population looking at child pornography? And I don't think that they are. It's because of those taboos. They see this and the red flags go up. And they're this anxiety and like it's wrong, or because somehow this is just burned into our minds, even though I guarantee you, people listening to this, their parents did not talk to them about child pornography.
Yeah. And there's a story playing in their head too when they look at that image, where they're able to kind of envision what went into the production of this and how a young child was being abused. But folks on the spectrum don't necessarily have that story intuitively playing in their head, right?
Right. So this is the other aspect of the difference in seeing a world that's not a social world. When we see somebody driving a red sports car or a tiny little smart electric car, we're not thinking about the car. We're thinking about the person that drives the car. What kind of person is that got that car? And we're attributing personality states to the people because of just a vehicle. And and our brains cannot resist in seeing the social attributes to the world around us. So
Right. Like he must be really insecure. He wants to flaunt his wealth. He's probably got a young girlfriend at home he's trying to impress. All these stories we start telling, right? I think if you're on the spectrum, all of a sudden you're looking at the lines on the car and the particular shape of the mirrors and distinguishing them between the 1,000 other you have cataloged in your head, and you get very like focused on the object rather than the human experience behind it, right?
Or he probably gets a lot of speeding tickets because police pick out red cars more than white cars.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so and one of the things that we often do, and that Dr. Klin did in his research at Yale, is there's a famous animation that lasts for about 50 seconds, which shows 2 triangles in a circle and some sticks in the range in the form of a box moving around. And when typically developed people look at this, they watch these figures moving around and they create a story in their head. They attribute people type characteristics and thinking to these geometric figures moving around, and they can't resist doing it. For people with autism, they don't see that. Their brain is not doing it. So when you talk about, so you're right. There's 2 parts to this this problem of say child pornography. One is if you don't have the taboo and the red flags don't go up. Well, why is this sex or nakedness any different than any other nakedness? And we could look at they might see nudist camps or something like that. Well, naked children walking around. They don't know that children don't have sex. They don't know that. They think that, and many will say, well, maybe they're actors. They seem like they're having fun. But the point is, when I talk to my clients about this, they're looking at sexual body parts, and they're not looking at what I would say is the gestalt of the child here. They're not looking at, they don't see the social attributes in that picture. They're not asking, whereas all we would do is look at saying, how would they put that child there? Who would do this? Who are the people making this? Where is this being made? Why doesn't somebody stop this?
Yeah.
We're not thinking about, we don't think of it as sex. The person who's looking at this on a continuum of from, all kinds of pornography of all sorts, gay, BDSM, all sorts of stuff. It's just another kind of, depiction of penises and vaginas. And they may wonder, it may be a question of, well, do children really do this or something? But they're not, their brain is not seeking out what our brains can't avoid. And so they're seeing a totally different world. They approach this without those inhibitions, which we got because we have a social mind and a social brain. And although you can rationalize to why, certainly most, I would say that I've never had a client who did not think that it would be wrong to have sex like that with a child, all right? But looking at a picture of it, and looking at a picture where it's just, body parts, is a completely different thing for them. I've had many clients say, well, wait a minute. What if I looked at the video of the planes crashing into the Twin Towers? Am I a participant in that crime? Is it like I enjoy that crime? Is it like I should be punished like the people that committed that crime? This is, of course, after, this is a rationalization for looking at child pornography. It's after they've been arrested and everybody's all upset. And they say, well, I was looking at a picture. What are you talking about? And it takes a long time for them to learn. And what I do with my clients is I walk them through the victim impact statements I've gotten in some cases where people who were victims of child pornography talk about how it affected them at the time and how it's affected their life. And every single time I do that, my clients are they're taken aback, and they just say they don't understand how they never understood this. And they're horrified by what they've done. Whereas, I'd never had, before I did cases involving autism, I never had and I did a lot of child pornography cases. I was very good at it. And keeping people, limiting the jail time and so on. But I never had anybody make that kind of realization. And the other side of this too is there's a moral panic, and there has been in the United States for decades over this child pornography business. And it was fueled by some very conservative people, mostly, not anybody that really were scholars or researchers who, talked about 40,000 children a year being kidnapped to make child pornography, and we had small children on milk cartons, and everybody was afraid that their children were going to be snatched off the street to create child pornography. And it was never the case. It was never the case at all. But that idea that it has really gotten into the consciousness, and so and this sex offender registration has gotten such a wide net of catching that. But in the United States, so we have these mandatory minimums for child pornography charges. The maximum sentence for production of child pornography in France is 2 years. Canada dabbled in a mandatory minimum of 1 year for possession of child pornography, and the courts of appeal struck that down. I don't think that's been resolved with the Supreme Court of Canada, but now basically they're not enforcing that. And they always allow judges to say that would be unconstitutional in this case. Except for Australia, the US is the only country that is so crazy about this and has so demonized these individuals. And obviously it can be concerning, but the ones who are looking at child pornography are the least dangerous. And of course, sex offender registration does nothing to prevent people from looking at child pornography. I mean, we've gotten off the track here a little bit. I don't know.
Well, we could. I mean, so no, I didn't know that about the other countries, but that's not surprising. I always feel like it's a Minority Report thing, that nobody in law enforcement believes that if you're looking, that you're not touching or you're not going to be the next hands-on offender. So what they're really doing is just ferreting out who they think are going to be real live sex offenders, and that's not true. But it is what it is. So yeah, I think that is another podcast, but it's a good one. And I actually had, I'll put it in the show notes, but I had a computer forensic person who I asked her, do you think that if the FBI wanted to eradicate most of this stuff online, they could just tag it electronically and destroy it, like go out into the interwebs and just disintegrate this stuff? And she said, yeah, they actually do have that capability. They want this out there because that's how they think they can catch sex offenders. But anyway, wow, what a good digression. But I'll put that link in the show notes. But I'll go. So, okay, so we've talked a lot about online sexual offenses. And I think before, I want to talk about other ways, other kinds of crimes this will come up. But just before, to make sure I've kind of hit this idea of the internet, because you talked about how our kids on this so mean to, they get bullied. They learn that it's very, very hard to have in-person, one-on-one social interactions. It's painful. It's anxiety ridden. It's depressing. And so they're driven to the internet. What makes the internet attractive for someone on the spectrum as a place where they think they can forge those relationships?
Well, there's a great deal of anxiety for somebody with autism in trying to reach out to other individuals, because they've learned that they don't have the same skill as others. They see other people navigating the social world effortlessly. They learn that they just can't do that. So there's all this anxiety about approaching other people. And so the internet, you can just say hi to somebody, somebody on their Instagram account. And I've had some clients who they've said, hi, do you like me? All right, 10,000 times. And maybe 20 people will respond to them, and they'll think, oh my gosh, I've got a friend. Or if they get into, some will go on to these, randomly paired chat sites where
Kick.
Yeah, well,
Kick, one of them.
Like video chat sites,
Oh.
where they can meet somebody else that they want to show their penis or vagina and masturbate. Well, and they can masturbate, and they have this sort of surrogate sexual experience. And I think that this goes back to another thing that I think is really, really important, that generally speaking, you or I and most of the people listening to this can envision a situation where they've been at a bus stop or waiting in line at a movie or at the grocery store or somewhere like that, and get in a chance conversation with somebody, a complete stranger. Maybe they're carrying a birthday cake. You say, oh, somebody's having a birthday. Oh, it's my daughter, and or something, and or maybe they, there's something about, well, my dog just died, so I get a cake for the family. We can have a conversation in 5 minutes with a stranger where we would experience true emotional highs and lows in that human encounter, because of this ability in our brain to communicate on a brain-to-brain level. Well, this is something that is very difficult, if not impossible, for an individual with autism to experience. And then imagine that's with a stranger. And then we have all these other degrees of relationships with the grocer or the postman or the people at work. And then people who we're attracted to in a social circle, and then intimate family members. This entire range of routine, emotionally reciprocal experiences with other people. And individuals with autism, that's not how they experience the world. So when you get a place where, in the privacy of your room, on your computer, you can have some excitement, well, let's say it's just sexual arousal, from looking at something or talking to somebody or engaging in a discussion where you exchange pictures, that is something that is irresistible. And it can become almost like an opioid. Mm-hmm. And the great TED Talk by Rachel Wertzman talking about social isolation and addiction. and this problem of being isolated and just, really, desperate for things that excite us and get us going. So I think, and of course, there's the technical reasons. I mean, the internet and computers generally are rule-based things where it doesn't depend on nuance and necessarily reading between the lines. Actually, texting and written communications does require reading between the lines, and so that's also can be a challenge of understanding even written communications. But generally speaking, you know what's going to come out when you know what you put into a computer. And so individuals, and also that, it can be real, often many individuals with autism become very, very skilled in computers, networks, and they will be curious. So I have one client who was asked by a doctor, well, why did you, what was interesting about this child pornography? He said, well, I'd never seen that before, So let me go look at that. It was just a matter of curiosity.
Mhm.
So the internet, the other thing too, I think, is that there's a lot of false friends out there who want to take advantage of them. But it gives them a feeling that they can, gives a feeling of the possibility of finding a relationship that that's meaningful. And one of the, in my practice, I've discovered a number of archetypes of offending. And one of the biggest ones is desperate for friendship. And so somebody will say, you can join our group, but go get this child pornography, or go open this trading account and do these trades, or send this message to these people or something like that. And of course, if for somebody to be your friend, to be part of a group, and this is the medium of exchanging these pictures, when they don't understand the wrongfulness of it.
Yeah.
The other thing, by the way, by the internet is, so they're seeing adolescents, they know, and they can see in different groups, adolescents have these radically sexual exchanges and conversations with each other. People are doing role play all the time. So they see this unbounded sexuality. And the internet has an age leveling effect. And so, well, we are highly conscious if somebody says, or more typically, an undercover officer says, I'm 13. To my clients, it's like, okay, well, so what? We're equal. You can turn off your computer. You're talking to me. And of course, sometimes, and I've seen this more than once, for reasons that people don't seem to care about as much, we have adolescents, pre-adolescents, who are searching for sexual experience, searching for role play, searching for a boyfriend, and they'll go after older men. I had one case where there was a 13-and-a-half-year-old girl who'd been communicating and exchanging sexually explicit pictures with 60 men. And nobody in the case is asking who's doing something for her to help her. Why was she doing that?
Right.
They're all about how my client was responsible for all her problems.
Yeah, because they've reached this magic age of 18, and that means they should know better, that if a minor's doing this, they shouldn't be doing it. But they don't. We had, which goes back to rule following, but we had a case where, in an effort to try to protect a child, a parent tells them nobody is who they say they are on the internet. So you have to be careful because people will misrepresent and take advantage of you. Well, that's a rule that was instilled in an autistic person on the spectrum who's their rule followers, so that when there's role play involved and then somebody says, I'm 14, why would you believe that? I have a rule in my head that's been beaten into my head since I was a kid that nobody's who they say they are online.
Or you have to be 18 on this particular site.
Yeah, these sites have rules. Are you 18? So why would there be anyone under 18 here? It's the same for child pornography. Why, if this is illegal, how is it so easy to get anywhere online?
Yeah, and that's the other thing. So, I mentioned before moral reasoning and the difficulty of people with autism to pick up on these rules about right and wrong that really are rooted in disgust and these social taboos. But it doesn't mean that they don't have moral principles. And very commonly, the strongest are fairness. Don't treat people differently. Don't cheat somebody, and not harming people. And so in terms of fairness, they say, well, if everybody's looking at this, it must be okay. Because you could possibly single out some person, you know, maybe they've heard maybe something about it being, quote, illegal, like marijuana is illegal, or like parking where you're not supposed to park is illegal. But how could this be so monstrously wrong if everybody is doing this? And that's the perception they can have when they look at the internet, when they don't have the social judgment to say, you know, well, these people are somehow staying under the radar when they're doing these sorts of things.
So tell me about, have you ever had cases? We talked a lot about sexual offenses online, and I know that most of our cases really are online these days, but would this issue ever be relevant to some other different kind of criminal charge? Have you had? I've had a couple I could share, but I want to know about you.
We've had cases for sure where getting back to the victimization of people with autism, putting people up to offenses. And I alluded to this before, you know, just open this trading account and do these trades, you know, look, you know, make this offer on this kind of stock or something. And they're the kind of trades in this one case where anybody would look at it and say, obviously this person is trading against themselves. Somebody's hacked into their account and is making very bad trades off of this account. And whereas the person who's been put up to this doesn't see the motivations of the person on the other side, that they just figure, hey, I've been a losing end of so many trades. Isn't it nice that at some point somebody else gives me a deal that's better for me than for them?
Mm-hmm.
And so, and this resulted in a federal prosecution, and then they end up getting convicted of some sort of offense when they had no clue that they were doing anything wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't involved in the resolution of that case, but that kind of thing can happen, being put up to offenses by other people.
And this is important for people listening, because I don't want someone to go, well, I don't do child porn cases. I don't do those kinds of cases. Well, you white collar lawyers that are listening to this podcast, because I know you're out there. This is an issue in white collar cases. I guarantee you we've missed it. I'm guilty too, but I think back to cases where the issue didn't come up, and I look back and say, I think we probably really missed this piece of the puzzle. Because let's say, for example, this is a real life example. I won't use any specifics. Client was literally a rocket scientist, no fooling, genius level, and all his life was just about finding problems and fixing them with these intricate, brilliant solutions, and got very into Bitcoin. And the biggest problem at the time was changing Bitcoin into real dollars. And so he became hyper focused on solving that problem and developed his own kind of system of exchange where he would trade dollars for Bitcoin. Well, the government got wind of this and they didn't like it, because who uses Bitcoin on the dark web to do dark things and bad things? No, my client wouldn't do anything like that. He was just fascinated he's been collecting coins his whole life, right? He was an avid coin collector. This was his fascination. But again, there's a whole social world around the people that he's exchanging money with who may be into credit card fraud or whatever it is. And so that he's oblivious to, because he's not seeing that story. He's hyper focused on, solving this problem. And then eventually the government gets somebody to tell him, give him enough information about that, what he's going to do with this Bitcoin that makes him an accomplice in all these conspiracy and all these crimes like credit card fraud. And all of a sudden he finds himself charged with a multiple count indictment for conspiracy halfway across the country. And, that's the story here. I really just wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking about this and had no idea about this other stuff going on. Even though people are telling me this stuff is going on, I'm not there with you. I'm not understanding that. Right.
The backstory on that is government sting operations, which seemed in many cases to be designed to catch people with developmental disabilities. I mean, there's a Craigslist posting by sheriffs in Florida, which said, "Get me pregnant." And about half the people they grabbed were people with developmental disabilities. So they'd call up and somebody say, "Oh, I'm 15, I want to get pregnant," and so he cut, meet me here, say, "Okay." but often they're bait and switch stings. They'll put a posting at one that this is a case in Kentucky where it was on on Backpage, I think, or one of these websites or whatever, and it showed this. It just said 18, a photograph of this very voluptuous torso, not showing the head, and then the phone number. Well, my client, this is only his third time he tried to meet somebody online, calls up and she says, the undercover cop says that after some discussion that she says, well, I'm not exactly 18. And he said, well, are you legal? Because he had learned from the first time he went online to try and have a sexual encounter and got caught by a police sting, that you've got to be 16 to have sex. Mm-hmm. So she said, well, I'm almost 18. He said, okay, so you're legal. And she doesn't say anything. And then later she says, of course, there'll be we asked for a $75 donation. So what looked originally like a sting to do something underage, which the only thing he knew about is it got to be somebody over 16, and they let him, and they know he wants to do the legal thing. They throw this, disguised fee thing for sex, which is disguised as a donation, which goes right over his head, and he gets arrested for patronizing somebody under 18 for prostitution. So
well, that's interesting, just with the rules in general when it comes to consent. Some states are 18, some are 16. Some have Romeo and Juliet laws where if they're 4 years apart or if you're blah, blah, blah. And then you have so a 16-year-old sent me a naked picture online. Well, 16 is the age of consent, so what's the harm in that? Well, guess what? That's production of child pornography with a 10 to 15-year mandatory minimum that you've just, trap that you've fallen into. So I think I'll tell my listeners right now, I think it's very likely this is going to be a 2-part episode. I liken it to those awesome double live albums of our wayward youth, That's it for today, but before we go, I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you to you, the listener, for spending time with us today getting set for sentencing. Whether you're a lawyer, someone who could use the help, or maybe you're just a true crime buff who loves the inside scoop on how this whole thing works, I am so glad you're here, and I hope you keep listening. If you're interested in knowing more about what I do, mitigation videos, case consults, live teaching, on-demand educational content, books, articles, all of it, please visit www.dougpassonlaw.com. I'm Doug Passon. Until next time, hang in there. Wait a minute, that's a stupid way to sign off on a podcast about sentencing. Hang in there. What's the matter with you, man? I guess they call that gallows humor. Sorry. All right. Well, I will see you next time on Set for Sentencing. Bye-bye.